Chapter 1: The Cadillac at My Gate. Ryan Mitchell believed his life was ordinary, and he liked it that way. At 42, ordinary meant waking up at 5 every morning before the sun rose. It meant strong black coffee in a chipped blue mug that said "World's Okayest Dad." It meant steel-toe boots by the door and a lunchbox Celeste packed every night before bed. Ordinary meant responsibility. Ryan worked as the chief electrician at Patterson Manufacturing, a job that demanded precision and patience. One mistake in his field could shut down an entire production line or worse. He supervised electrical systems most people would never understand, heavy machinery, automated circuits, and complex control panels that powered the plant. The hours were long. The work was exhausting, but it paid well. Well enough to afford the quiet two-story house on Maple Ridge Drive. Well enough to support his family. And Ryan Mitchell was proud of that. Every morning before leaving for work, he would pause at the kitchen doorway and watch the two people who made everything worth it: Celeste and Jordan. Celeste had been his wife for 15 years. They met at a friend's barbecue in their 20s. She had laughed at one of his terrible jokes, and Ryan had known right then that he was in trouble. She was beautiful in a calm, effortless way. Long dark hair, sharp eyes, and a voice that could shift between warm and icy depending on her mood. Over the years, she had become the center of their home. The organizer, the planner, the one who made sure Jordan's school projects were finished and the bills were paid. Ryan trusted her completely. Then there was Jordan, 9 years old, energy packed into a skinny body that never seemed to slow down. Jordan loved soccer, video games, and asking endless questions about how things worked. "Dad, why do lights turn on when you flip the switch? Dad, how does electricity move through wires? Dad, could you build a robot?" Ryan always answered every question, because fatherhood meant patience. Ryan believed his life was built on 3 simple things: hard work, loyalty, family. And for 15 years, that belief had never been challenged. Until the afternoon, everything shattered. It was just after 3 o'clock when Ryan left work early. The factory had shut down one production line due to a parts shortage, which meant half the electrical team was sent home. Ryan didn't mind. Leaving early felt like stealing time from the universe. Maybe he'd surprise Jordan when he got home from school. Maybe he and Celeste could sit on the porch and drink iced tea before dinner. Small things. Ordinary things. Ryan drove his pickup down Maple Ridge Drive, sunlight flickering through the tall trees lining the neighborhood. The houses were quiet, lawns trimmed, mailboxes standing in neat rows. It was the kind of neighborhood where nothing dramatic ever happened. Ryan turned the corner toward his house. Then he frowned. A black Cadillac was sitting in his driveway. The car was long, sleek, expensive. Its polished surface reflected the afternoon sun like a mirror. Ryan slowed his truck. "That's strange," he muttered. Celeste didn't know anyone who drove something like that. He pulled up to the curb and shut off the engine. For a moment, he just sat there staring at the vehicle. Something about it felt wrong. Too deliberate. Too out of place. Ryan stepped out of his truck and closed the door quietly. The air felt heavy. Then the driver's side door of the Cadillac opened. Ryan's stomach tightened. Celeste was sitting in the passenger seat. Her face was calm, almost expressionless. But she wasn't alone. A man sat beside her in the driver's seat. Ryan had never seen him before. The man looked to be in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. Perfectly styled silver hair. Expensive suit. A watch on his wrist that probably cost more than Ryan's truck. The man didn't look surprised to see Ryan. If anything, he looked amused. Before Ryan could speak, the back doors of the Cadillac opened. 2 men stepped out. They were big. Not just tall, thick through the shoulders and chest like they spent most of their time lifting weights or breaking things. One of them rolled his neck slowly. The other cracked his knuckles. Ryan stood still on the edge of the driveway. The larger of the 2 men walked forward, stopping about 10 feet away. He looked Ryan up and down with a smirk. "Ryan Mitchell?" the man asked. Ryan didn't answer. The man chuckled. "Yeah," he said to his partner. "That's him." Ryan finally spoke. "Who are you?" The man ignored the question. Instead, he jerked his thumb toward the Cadillac. "See the lady in the car?" Ryan's eyes flicked briefly toward Celeste. She still hadn't moved, hadn't opened the door. Hadn't said a word. The man grinned wider. "She's with us now," he said. Ryan felt something cold settle in his chest. The man took another step closer. "And we're here to break your ribs." For a long moment, no one moved. Ryan looked at the two men, then at the Cadillac, then at Celeste. She avoided his eyes. Ryan took a slow breath. Then he smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a small, calm one. "Her choice," Ryan said quietly. The two men exchanged a glance. Ryan tilted his head slightly. "But bringing you two?" He shrugged. "That's the mistake." The larger man snorted. "Cocky," he said. Then he rushed forward. His partner followed half a second behind. They charged. What happened next unfolded so fast it barely registered. The first man swung a heavy punch aimed at Ryan's head. Ryan stepped sideways. The fist cut through empty air. Ryan drove his elbow hard into the man's ribs. A loud grunt exploded from the thug's chest. Before the second man could react, Ryan grabbed his arm and twisted sharply. A sickening pop echoed in the driveway. The man screamed. Ryan shoved him backward into the Cadillac door. The first thug tried to recover. Ryan didn't give him the chance. A quick hook to the jaw, a sharp knee to the stomach. The man collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for breath. 30 seconds, maybe less. Both men were on the ground, one groaning, the other clutching his arm. Ryan stood over them, breathing steadily. The quiet street felt frozen. Birds chirped somewhere in the distance. Ryan turned slowly toward the Cadillac. The stranger in the driver's seat was watching him carefully now. The amused expression had faded. Ryan looked past him, at Celeste. She finally met his eyes. For just a moment, Ryan expected something. Shock, fear, guilt, anything. But Celeste's face was blank, cold. She didn't scream. She didn't run toward him. She didn't even open the door. Instead, she slowly reached for the handle. Ryan took a step forward. "Celeste," he said. But she didn't answer. She simply got back into the Cadillac beside the stranger. The driver started the engine. The car rolled backward down a driveway. Ryan's heart began pounding. Then he saw something through the rear window. A small face. Jordan. His son sat in the back seat. Jordan looked confused. Scared. "Dad," the boy started. But the window rolled up. The Cadillac turned. Then it drove away down Maple Ridge Drive. Ryan stood in the driveway, realizing his life had just collapsed. Chapter 2. The Divorce Bomb. Ryan didn't sleep that night. He tried. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling while the clock on the nightstand ticked past midnight, then 1, then 2 in the morning. But sleep never came. The house felt wrong. Too quiet. Too empty. Jordan's sneakers still sat near the front door where the boy had kicked them off the day before. A half-finished Lego spaceship rested on the living room coffee table. A soccer ball sat against the hallway wall. Every small detail reminded Ryan of the moment the black Cadillac had disappeared down Maple Ridge Drive, with his son in the back seat, and his wife beside another man. Ryan replayed the scene again and again in his mind. The way Celeste had looked at him. Not angry, not afraid, just distant, like he was already part of her past. Around 4 in the morning, Ryan finally got up. He walked into the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water, staring out the window at the empty driveway. The space where the Cadillac had been parked felt like a scar. "What the hell is going on?" he muttered to himself. His phone sat on the counter. Ryan picked it up and dialed Celeste's number. The call rang once. Then it went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. Ryan exhaled slowly and leaned against the counter. "Pick up, Celeste," he whispered. But she didn't. Morning arrived like a hammer. At exactly 8:17 a.m., someone knocked on the front door. 3 sharp, official knocks. Ryan frowned and walked down the hallway. When he opened the door, a man in a gray suit stood on the porch holding a clipboard. "Ryan Mitchell?" the man asked. "Yes." The man handed him a thick envelope. "You've been served." Ryan blinked. "Served?" The man pointed to the papers inside the envelope. "Divorce petition filed in county court. Instructions and documentation are included." Ryan felt his stomach tighten. "Wait, what?" The man had already turned toward the walkway. "Have a good day, Mr. Mitchell." Ryan stood frozen as the man walked back to a parked sedan and drove away. For several seconds, Ryan didn't move. Then he slowly opened the envelope. The first page made his chest feel like it had been punched. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Filed by Celeste Mitchell. Ryan flipped to the next document. His pulse began racing. A restraining order. The court had ordered him to remain at least 300 feet away from Celeste. Ryan's fingers tightened around the papers. "This can't be real," he whispered. Then he reached the next document, and everything inside him went cold. Temporary custody of minor child Jordan Mitchell granted to petitioner Celeste Mitchell. Ryan stared at the words. They blurred together for a moment. Temporary custody, he murmured. The papers slipped slightly in his hands. How was that even possible? He flipped through the stack again. The filing date hit him like a brick. Yesterday morning, hours before the confrontation in the driveway, before the Cadillac, before the two thugs, before Celeste had driven away. Ryan slowly lowered the papers. It was already planned, he said quietly. Everything had already been prepared. He tried calling Celeste again, straight to voicemail. He texted, "We need to talk." No reply. He called again. Nothing. Ryan paced across the living room, anger beginning to build in his chest. "What the hell are you doing?" he muttered. His phone buzzed suddenly. For a split second, he thought it might be Celeste. It wasn't. It was a news notification. Ryan ignored it and dialed again. Voicemail. He tossed the phone onto the couch in frustration. Damn it, Celeste. An hour later, Ryan drove to Patterson Manufacturing. The factory parking lot looked the same as it always did. Rows of trucks, workers walking toward the entrance, forklifts moving pallets near the loading docks. Everything normal. Ryan walked through the front doors and nodded to the security guard. "Morning, Ryan." "Morning." But before Ryan could head toward the electrical department, a voice stopped him. "Mr. Mitchell?" Ryan turned. A woman from Human Resources stood near the reception desk. Her expression looked uncomfortable. "Could you come with me, please?" Ryan frowned. "Sure." She led him down the hallway toward a small conference room. When Ryan stepped inside, two people were already seated at the table. The HR director and a man from corporate legal. Ryan's stomach tightened again. "Is something wrong?" Ryan asked. The HR director folded her hands. "Ryan, we need to discuss an incident that occurred yesterday afternoon." Ryan pulled out a chair slowly. "What incident?" The man from legal slid a folder across the table. "Two individuals filed assault complaints against you this morning." Ryan stared at him. "Excuse me?" "They claim you attacked them without provocation." Ryan let out a short laugh. "You mean the two guys who threatened me on my own driveway?" The HR director avoided his eyes. "The police report states you caused serious injury to one individual and a broken arm to another." "They rushed me," Ryan said sharply. "They said they were going to break my ribs." The legal representative spoke calmly. "Regardless of circumstances, the situation has created liability concerns for the company." Ryan leaned forward. "So what are you saying?" The HR director took a deep breath. "Ryan, effective immediately, Patterson Manufacturing is terminating your employment." The room went silent. Ryan stared at her. "You're firing me?" "We don't have a choice." Ryan pushed back his chair and stood. "I've worked here 12 years. We understand. I've never had a single disciplinary issue. We're aware of that." Ryan looked from one face to the other. "You're throwing me out because two random thugs filed a complaint?" The man from legal spoke again. "There are also concerns regarding potential media attention surrounding the incident." Ryan felt anger boiling inside him now. "This is ridiculous." "I'm sorry," the HR director said softly. Ryan grabbed the folder off the table. "You'll be receiving final paperwork regarding your termination," she added. Ryan didn't respond. He walked out of the room, down the hallway, through the factory doors, outside into the parking lot. The sunlight felt harsh against his eyes. Ryan stood beside his truck for a long moment, trying to steady his breathing. Within 24 hours, he had lost his wife, his son, and now his job. Ryan slowly climbed into the driver's seat. Then something clicked inside his mind. The stranger in the Cadillac. The man with the expensive suit. Ryan remembered the name written in the divorce documents. Sebastian Moretti, a wealthy real estate developer. Powerful. Connected. Ryan stared through the windshield. Someone was moving against him, and they were moving fast. Very fast. Ryan picked up his phone. There were only two people he trusted enough to call right now. The first was an old friend, a defense attorney named Grant Stevens. The second was a private investigator Ryan had worked with once during a factory fraud case. Dennis Cole. Ryan scrolled through his contacts. Then he pressed dial. If someone wanted war, Ryan was ready to start digging. Chapter 3. The investigation begins. Ryan met Dennis Cole 2 days later in a quiet diner on the edge of town. It wasn't the kind of place people visited unless they were regulars. The vinyl booths were worn smooth from years of use, and the coffee tasted like it had been brewed sometime around sunrise and left on the burner ever since. Ryan sat near the window, staring down at the untouched mug in front of him. Outside, traffic moved slowly through the afternoon drizzle. Inside, his life was still collapsing piece by piece. The bell above the diner door jingled. Ryan looked up. Dennis Cole stepped inside. The private investigator looked exactly the same as the last time Ryan had seen him 3 years ago, tall, lean, with thinning gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything in the room at once. Dennis spotted Ryan and walked over. He slid into the booth across from him. "Hell of a situation you've got yourself in," Dennis said. Ryan exhaled slowly. "Yeah," he replied. "That's one way to describe it." A waitress approached. "Coffee?" she asked Dennis. "Black," he said. She poured the drink and walked away. Dennis leaned forward slightly. "So," he said, "tell me everything from the beginning." Ryan did. He explained the Cadillac, the two thugs, Celeste sitting beside the stranger, Jordan in the back seat, then the divorce papers, the restraining order, losing his job. Dennis didn't interrupt once. He simply listened, his expression calm and thoughtful. When Ryan finished, the private investigator rubbed his chin. "You mentioned the guy in the car," Dennis said. "Sebastian Moretti." Ryan nodded. "Real estate developer," Dennis continued. "Very wealthy, very connected." "Yeah," Ryan said bitterly. "I'm starting to figure that out." Dennis took a sip of coffee. "So what exactly do you want me to find?" Ryan didn't hesitate. "Everything." Dennis studied him for a moment. "That can get expensive." Ryan shrugged. "My life's already being destroyed. Might as well know why." The investigator nodded slowly. "Fair enough." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small notebook. "Let's start with Celeste." Ryan leaned back at the booth. "What about her?" Dennis flipped open the notebook. "When someone leaves a marriage like that," he said, "especially when lawyers and restraining orders are already lined up, it usually means planning." Ryan's jaw tightened. "You think she's been planning this for a while?" Dennis met his eyes. "I bet money on it." Ryan looked down at the table. "Then find out how long." Dennis closed the notebook. "I'll start digging today." 3 days later, Dennis called Ryan. "Meet me in my office," he said. "Something wrong?" Ryan asked. Dennis paused for a moment. "Just come by." That was enough to make Ryan uneasy. Dennis's office sat above a small insurance agency downtown. The hallway smelled faintly of old carpet and dust. Ryan knocked on a frosted glass door. "Come in," Dennis called. Ryan stepped inside. The office was cluttered with filing cabinets, stacks of folders, and 2 large computer monitors glowing on the desk. Dennis sat behind the desk with several documents spread out in front of him. He didn't look happy. Ryan closed the door. "That bad?" Ryan asked. Dennis leaned back in his chair. "I started with your bank records." Ryan frowned. "What about them?" Dennis slid a printed spreadsheet across the desk. "Take a look." Ryan stepped closer. His eyes scanned the columns of numbers. "Withdrawals, transfers, payments. What am I looking for?" Ryan asked. Dennis tapped a line with his finger. "Start there." Ryan leaned down. The transfer amount made his eyebrows rise. $3,500. Then he noticed another entry. And another. And another. Ryan's frown deepened. "These are all transfers from our joint account." Dennis nodded. "Exactly." Ryan kept reading. Each withdrawal was small enough not to trigger alarms. A few hundred here, 1,000 there, spread out over months. But the totals added up. Ryan straightened slowly. "How much?" he asked. Dennis folded his arms. "Just over $40,000. Ryan stared at him. "40,000? Over the last 2 years." Ryan ran a hand through his hair. "I never noticed." Dennis shrugged slightly. "Most people wouldn't." The amounts were small and spaced out. Ryan looked back down at the spreadsheet. "She's been taking money from our account for 2 years," he said quietly. Dennis nodded again. "And that's not the strangest part." Ryan looked up. What do you mean? Dennis turned one of the computer monitors toward him. A property listing filled the screen. Ryan squinted. Is that a condo? Dennis clicked the document open. Purchased 3 years ago under Celeste's maiden name. Ryan felt a chill run through him. Where? Riverside District. About 20 minutes from here. Ryan shook his head slowly. She never mentioned anything about buying property. That's because she didn't want you to know, Dennis said. Ryan leaned closer to the monitor. How often was it used? Dennis opened another file. Pretty frequently. Ryan's chest tightened. What does that mean? Dennis sighed. I had someone do a few days of surveillance. Ryan didn't like the sound of that. What did they see? Dennis hesitated. Then he answered. Different men. Ryan froze. How many? Dennis rubbed the back of his neck. Enough to make it clear this wasn't a one-time thing. Ryan felt like the floor beneath him had shifted. You're saying she was cheating? Dennis looked him in the eye. Yeah. Ryan clenched his fists. For how long? Dennis hesitated again. 8 years. The words felt like a punch. Ryan turned away from the desk and stared out the office window. 8 years. More than half their marriage. All this time, Ryan said quietly. All those nights, she said she was out with friends. Dennis didn't interrupt. Ryan laughed bitterly. I thought we had a good marriage. Dennis spoke carefully. Ryan turned back toward him. What? Dennis picked up another file. There's something else. Ryan felt his stomach drop. Of course there is. Dennis opened the file and slid a single document across the desk. Ryan looked down. At first, he didn't understand what he was reading. Then the words registered. Birth record. Mother. Celeste Carter. Date. 14 years ago. Ryan's breath caught. A child, he whispered. Dennis nodded. A daughter. Ryan's eyes scanned the page again. Name. Emma Carter. His mind raced. That doesn't make sense, Ryan said. Jordan's only 9. Dennis leaned forward. This happened before you married Celeste. Ryan's voice was barely audible. She never told me. Dennis tapped the bottom of the page. Because the child was given up for adoption. Ryan stared at the document in silence. 14 years. A daughter. A secret child he had never known about. The weight of it pressed down on his chest. How? Ryan began slowly. How many lies was my marriage built on? Dennis didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the files scattered across his desk. Then he met Ryan's eyes again. I'm starting to think you haven't even seen the worst of it yet. Chapter 4. The system turns against Ryan. Ryan began to understand something terrifying. This wasn't chaos. It was strategy. Every problem hitting him seemed separate on the surface. Legal paperwork, job loss, accusations, court orders. But when he stepped back and looked at everything together, it formed a pattern. Someone wasn't just attacking him. Someone was dismantling his life piece by piece. And they were doing it with precision. 3 weeks after the confrontation in his driveway, Ryan sat in a small conference room inside Grant Stevens' law office. Grant had been Ryan's friend since college. They had shared cheap apartments, late-night pizza, and more bad decisions than either of them cared to remember. But the man sitting across the table now looked very different from the reckless law student Ryan once knew. Grant Stevens was now a seasoned defense attorney. Sharp suit, sharp mind, and right now, a very serious expression. Grant tossed a thin stack of papers onto the table. The assault case is moving forward, he said. Ryan rubbed his temples. You got to be kidding me. Nope. Grant slid one of the pages toward him. Both men filed sworn statements. They claim you attacked them without warning. Ryan stared at the document. They threatened me, he said. They literally said they were going to break my ribs. Grant nodded. I believe you. Ryan looked up. But Grant leaned back in his chair. But their lawyer claims they were simply visiting the property to discuss a personal matter when you assaulted them. Ryan laughed bitterly. That's ridiculous. Grant didn't laugh. It doesn't have to be believable, he said. It just has to create legal trouble. Ryan exhaled slowly. So now I'm defending myself in court because 2 hired goons decided to lie. Grant tapped the table. Welcome to litigation. Ryan shook his head. This whole thing is insane. Grant looked down at the documents again. And it's just getting started. 2 days later, Ryan discovered how true that statement was. He was standing in a grocery store checkout line when his phone buzzed. It was a message from Grant. Call me. Now. Ryan stepped outside and dialed immediately. Grant answered on the first ring. You sitting down? Grant asked. No, Ryan said. Should I be? Grant sighed. The custody case just got assigned to a judge. Ryan leaned against the brick wall outside the store. Okay. There was a long pause on the line. Ryan frowned. Grant. The lawyer finally spoke again. Judge Thompson. Ryan didn't recognize the name. So, Grant didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was tense. So that's bad. Ryan felt his stomach tighten. What? Grant lowered his voice slightly. Thompson has a reputation. What kind of reputation? The kind where wealthy people tend to win. Ryan stared across the parking lot. You're telling me the judge favors rich defendants. I'm telling you, Grant said carefully, that if someone with money and influence is involved in a case, Thompson usually rules their way. Ryan didn't like the direction this was going. And Sebastian Moretti definitely qualifies as someone with money, Ryan said. Exactly. Ryan clenched his jaw. This is unbelievable. Grant continued speaking. We'll still fight it. But you should understand something. What? Grant's voice was blunt. The odds just got worse. Later that evening, Ryan met Dennis Cole again. The private investigator had spread several printed documents across his office desk. Ryan walked in and immediately noticed the investigator's serious expression. More bad news? Ryan asked. Dennis didn't bother sugarcoating it. Yeah. Ryan sat down slowly. What now? Dennis tapped one of the documents. I did some digging into Judge Thompson. Ryan leaned forward. And Dennis slid the paper across the desk. Ryan scanned the page. Several business records. Financial contributions. Charity events. What am I looking at? Ryan asked. Dennis pointed to one line. Ryan's eyes narrowed. The name Sebastian Moretti appeared several times. Donations. Fundraisers. Investment partnerships. Ryan looked up slowly. You're telling me the judge knows Sebastian? Dennis nodded. Not just knows him. He tapped the page again. They've been involved in the same financial circles for years. Ryan leaned back in the chair. You got to be kidding me. Dennis shook his head. Nope. Ryan rubbed his face with both hands. So the guy trying to take my kid away is connected to the judge deciding custody. That's what it looks like. Ryan stared at the ceiling. This just keeps getting better. Dennis studied him quietly. Actually, he said, it might get worse. Ryan lowered his hands. Ow! Dennis reached for another folder. Something new popped up this morning. Ryan frowned. What kind of something? Dennis opened the folder and pulled out a printed email. Someone filed an anonymous complaint with the immigration office. Ryan's eyebrows drew together. Immigration? Dennis slid the document across the desk. Ryan read the first few lines. Then his stomach dropped. The complaint claimed Ryan's immigration paperwork might contain irregularities. Ryan looked up sharply. That's ridiculous. Dennis shrugged. Maybe, but complaints like this trigger investigations. Ryan's pulse quickened. If they start digging into my records, they'll review everything, Dennis said. Ryan stood up and began pacing across the office. I've lived here 20 years, he said. My paperwork is clean. Dennis nodded. I believe you. Ryan stopped pacing. But if someone powerful is pushing the investigation, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Ryan knew exactly what could happen. If they find even a small technical issue, he said slowly, they could start deportation proceedings. Dennis didn't argue. Ryan felt anger rising in his chest again. This isn't random, he said. No, Dennis agreed. Ryan turned toward him. Someone filed that complaint on purpose. Dennis leaned back in his chair. Most likely. Ryan thought about Sebastian Moretti, the money, the lawyers, the influence, and now the immigration complaint. The pieces started fitting together. Later that night, Ryan returned to Grant's office. The lawyer listened carefully as Ryan explained everything Dennis had discovered. When Ryan finished, the room fell silent. Grant leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. Well, he said quietly. Ryan waited. Grant looked him directly in the eye. This isn't a divorce case. Ryan frowned. What do you mean? Grant's voice was firm. You're being dismantled piece by piece. Ryan felt a chill run down his spine. The words matched exactly what he had been feeling. Every problem, every accusation, every legal trap, all carefully timed. Ryan sat back in the chair. Only one question remained. Why, he asked. Grant didn't answer. Instead, he looked toward Dennis. The investigator had joined the meeting quietly and now stood near the window. Dennis thought for a moment before speaking. Then he said quietly, I think your job might be the answer. Chapter 5, The Hidden Operation. Ryan had spent the last week trying to hold the pieces of his life together. But every new discovery made that harder. He woke each morning in the same quiet house, walking past Jordan's empty bedroom and the half-finished Lego spaceship still sitting on the coffee table. Some days he caught himself staring at it for several minutes before realizing what he was doing. It felt like his real life had been erased and replaced with something darker. Legal threats, investigations, secrets. And now Dennis Cole had asked him to come back to the office again. When Ryan walked in, the private investigator was already sitting at his desk, surrounded by a mess of open folders and glowing computer screens. Ryan noticed something immediately. Dennis looked unsettled. That alone made Ryan uneasy. You look like someone who found a body, Ryan said. Dennis didn't smile. Sit down, he replied. Ryan lowered himself into the chair across from the desk. What did you find this time? Dennis leaned back and folded his arms. I started digging into Patterson Manufacturing. Ryan frowned. My job. Dennis nodded. You said something last time that stuck with me. What? Dennis looked directly at him. You said everything started falling apart right after that confrontation in your driveway. Ryan shrugged slightly. Yeah. So I started asking myself a question, Dennis continued. What question? Dennis tapped the desk lightly. Why would someone like Sebastian Moretti care about a factory electrician? Ryan leaned back. I wasn't just a regular electrician. I know. Ryan rubbed his chin. As chief electrician, I supervised the power systems for the entire facility. Dennis nodded. And some of the specialized labs. Ryan paused. Yes. Dennis slid a folder across the desk. Exactly. Ryan opened the folder. The first document was a government contract summary. Ryan's eyebrows slowly lifted. This isn't public information. Dennis gave a small shrug. I have ways. Ryan flipped through the pages. Technical descriptions, equipment lists, budget allocations. Then he saw the number printed near the top of one page. $42 million defense contract. Ryan looked up. What is this? Dennis rested his elbows on the desk. Patterson Manufacturing isn't just a factory. Ryan frowned. What do you mean? Dennis spoke carefully. It's quietly involved in several classified military technology contracts. Ryan stared at him. That's not possible. Dennis pointed at the documents. Take a closer look. Ryan flipped to another page. Electrical system diagrams. Prototype testing schedules. Defense Department references. Slowly the truth started to sink in. The advanced testing labs, Ryan murmured. Dennis nodded. They're used for developing high-end electrical systems for military hardware. Ryan leaned back in his chair. Why didn't we know about this? Dennis chuckled quietly. Because companies working on classified contracts tend to keep that quiet. Ryan stared down at the documents again. His mind began connecting pieces he had never considered before. Restricted access areas, extra security, certain equipment that only a handful of technicians were allowed to work on. As chief electrician, Ryan had clearance to maintain the power infrastructure for those systems, which meant he had access. Ryan looked back up slowly. You're saying those labs are worth serious money. Dennis nodded once. Millions in defense contracts. Ryan felt his chest tighten. And someone might want information about those systems. Exactly. Ryan sat in silence for a moment. Then he asked the obvious question. What does that have to do with Celeste? Dennis didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened another folder. This is where things get strange. Ryan felt a knot forming in his stomach. How strange. Dennis pulled out a printed report. 8 years ago, he said slowly, Celeste began working with a corporate intelligence firm. Ryan blinked. What? Dennis slid the document across the desk. Ryan read the heading. Strategic Information Solutions, Personnel File. Ryan frowned. That sounds like a consulting company. Dennis shook his head. Front organization. Ryan looked up. For what? Dennis leaned forward. Corporate espionage. Ryan felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. You're serious? Dennis nodded. Their business model is pretty straightforward. Ryan swallowed. What do they do? Dennis listed it calmly. Identify companies working on valuable technology. Locate employees with access to sensitive information. Insert operatives into their personal lives. Ryan's voice came out barely above a whisper. Operatives? Dennis met his eyes. People who can get close enough to gather information. Ryan stared at him. You mean spies? Dennis didn't disagree. They call them assets. Ryan leaned forward suddenly. What does Celeste have to do with that? Dennis opened another file. According to the records, Celeste had been recruited by the firm 8 years earlier. Ryan's confusion deepened. 8 years. Dennis nodded. That's when she started receiving payments. Ryan frowned. But we were already married by then. Dennis tapped the document, which made her extremely valuable. Ryan felt his stomach turn. Because I worked at Patterson. Exactly. Ryan stood up and began pacing across the office. No, he said. That doesn't make sense. Dennis watched him quietly. Ryan ran a hand through his hair. You're telling me my wife was spying on me? Dennis didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into the folder again. There's one more thing you need to see. Ryan stopped pacing. Dennis slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. A timeline. Ryan picked it up. The first entry made his heart skip. Initial recruitment contact. Ryan frowned. What is this? Dennis didn't speak. Ryan kept reading. Dates. Meetings. Training sessions. Financial transfers. Then his eyes moved to the very first entry on the page. Ryan's breath caught. The date was 15 years ago, 6 months before he had met Celeste at that barbecue. Ryan slowly lowered the paper. His mind raced. That can't be right. Dennis watched him carefully. Ryan looked down at the page again. Every detail lined up. Every step. Every stage. The timeline began 6 months before Ryan met Celeste. Ryan felt cold, like someone had poured ice water into his veins. He looked up at Dennis. What are you saying? Dennis hesitated for a moment. Then he spoke. I think your marriage was the operation. Chapter 6, the $5 million offer. Ryan first heard about the meeting through Grant. It was late afternoon when his phone buzzed while he was sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by legal paperwork and investigator reports. Grant didn't bother with greetings. Sebastian Moretti wants to meet you. Ryan leaned back in his chair. For a moment, he thought he had heard wrong. He what? Grant repeated it. He requested a private meeting. Ryan stared at the wall across the kitchen. The name Sebastian Moretti still felt like poison in his ears. The man had taken his wife, taken his son, destroyed his career, and now he wanted a meeting. Ryan spoke slowly. What kind of meeting? Grant's voice carried a note of caution. Informal. Ryan laughed quietly. There's nothing informal about that guy. I know. So what's the catch? Grant paused. He asked for it to be just the two of you. Ryan's eyes narrowed. That's not happening. Grant agreed immediately. It won't be. I'll be nearby. Ryan considered it. What does he want? Grant sighed. He didn't say. Ryan looked down at the documents scattered across the table, financial records, surveillance photos, legal notices. Every one of them traced back to Sebastian Moretti. The man had been attacking Ryan from every angle for weeks. And now he suddenly wanted to talk. Ryan's jaw tightened. Fine, he said. Grant didn't sound thrilled. Ryan, I'll hear him out, Ryan interrupted. Nothing more. Grant was quiet for a moment. Then he said, tomorrow, 4 p.m. private room at the Marlowe Hotel. Ryan nodded, even though Grant couldn't see it. All right. When the call ended, Ryan sat in silence. Something told him this meeting wouldn't be friendly. The Marlowe Hotel was one of the most expensive places in the city. Ryan had only been there once before, years earlier, for a company banquet. The lobby alone looked like it belonged in a movie. Polished marble floors, tall glass chandeliers, and quiet classical music drifting through the air. Ryan felt slightly out of place walking through it in a simple jacket and jeans. Grant stood near the elevators when Ryan arrived. You ready for this? The lawyer asked. Ryan shrugged. As ready as I'll ever be. Grant lowered his voice. I'll be in the lounge down the hall. If anything feels wrong, walk out. Ryan nodded. Then a hotel employee approached them. Mr. Mitchell? Ryan turned. Yes. This way, please. The employee led him down a quiet hallway toward a private dining room. When the door opened, Ryan saw him immediately. Sebastian Moretti sat alone at a polished wooden table. The man looked exactly like Ryan remembered from the Cadillac. Expensive suit, perfectly styled hair, the relaxed confidence of someone used to controlling every situation. Sebastian looked up and smiled. "Mr. Mitchell," he said smoothly. Ryan stepped into the room. The door closed behind him. Sebastian gestured to the chair across the table. "Please, sit." Ryan didn't smile back, but he sat. For a moment, neither man spoke. Sebastian poured himself a glass of sparkling water. Then he leaned back in his chair. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet." Ryan folded his arms. "Let's skip the small talk." Sebastian chuckled softly. "Straight to business." "I respect that." Ryan stared at him. "What do you want?" Sebastian didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached down beside his chair and picked up a small leather folder. He placed it carefully on the table. Then he opened it. Ryan watched closely. Sebastian removed a single piece of paper. Then he slid it across the table. Ryan looked down. His eyebrows slowly lifted. It was a check. The number written across the center made his stomach tighten. $5 million. Ryan looked back up. Sebastian smiled calmly. $5 million. Ryan blinked once. "You're trying to buy me." Sebastian spread his hands casually. "I prefer to think of it as a settlement." Ryan leaned back in his chair. "For what exactly?" Sebastian's voice remained calm. "The deal is very simple." Ryan waited. Sebastian listed the terms one by one. "You give up custody of Jordan." Ryan felt anger spark in his chest. "You drop all legal actions against Celeste." The anger grew stronger. "And you quietly relocate." Ryan stared at him. "Relocate?" Sebastian shrugged slightly. "Another state. Another life." Ryan's voice was cold. "And in exchange?" Sebastian tapped the check lightly. "You walk away rich." The room fell silent. Ryan looked down at the check again. $5 million. More money than he had ever imagined having. For a moment, Ryan said nothing. Sebastian watched him carefully. "You see," Sebastian continued, "this situation doesn't need to become messy." Ryan's eyes moved slowly back up to him. "Messy? Yes." Sebastian leaned forward slightly. "You've already lost your job. Your legal situation is complicated. The courts are rarely kind in cases like this." Ryan didn't respond. Sebastian's voice remained smooth. "You could spend years fighting." He tapped the check again. "Or you could take the smart option." Ryan picked up the check. Sebastian smiled. "I knew you were a practical man." Ryan studied the paper for a long moment. Then he began tearing it, right down the middle. The sound of ripping paper echoed in the quiet room. Sebastian's smile vanished. Ryan tore the check again, and again. Small pieces of paper fell onto the table. Ryan dropped them in front of Sebastian. "And you walk away with nothing," Sebastian said coldly. Ryan leaned forward across the table. His voice was calm. "You took my wife," Ryan said. Sebastian didn't react. "You tried to take my son." Sebastian's eyes narrowed slightly. Ryan pushed his chair back and stood. The table sat between them like a line drawn in stone. Ryan looked down at him. "Now let's see what happens when I start taking things back." Chapter 7. The Courtroom Cracks. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood, paper, and old tension. Ryan Cole sat stiffly at the defense table, his fingers laced tightly together as he stared at the polished surface in front of him. Every muscle in his body felt coiled, like a cable wound too tight around a spool. Across the room, Celeste sat with Sebastian Moretti and a team of expensive lawyers who looked like they had never lost a case in their lives. Celeste didn't look at Ryan. She hadn't looked at him once since the hearing began. Her posture was composed, calm, perfect, like she was attending a charity gala instead of a custody hearing about the son they had once raised together. Ryan felt the familiar sting in his chest. 14 years of marriage. And now she looked at him like he was a stranger she had accidentally passed on the street. Grant leaned slightly toward Ryan and whispered quietly, "Stay calm. They're going to start ugly." Ryan nodded. He already expected that. Judge Thompson entered the courtroom a moment later, adjusting his glasses as he took his seat behind the elevated bench. The courtroom rose. "Be seated," the judge said. The moment everyone sat, Celeste's lead attorney stood. A tall, silver-haired man named Victor Hale. Expensive suit. Confident posture. the kind of lawyer who made a living destroying people politely. Your Honor, Hale began smoothly. Today we present a matter of safety. My client, Mrs. Celeste Cole, seeks sole custody of her son, Jordan, due to ongoing concerns regarding the father's instability and dangerous behavior. Ryan felt Grant shift beside him, but said nothing. Hale continued. Mr. Cole has demonstrated repeated patterns of aggression, manipulation, and emotional volatility. Ryan clenched his jaw. The words sounded rehearsed, prepared, like they had been waiting months to say them. Hale turned slightly toward the judge. Most recently, Mr. Cole assaulted 2 individuals outside his residence. Ryan's hands tightened. 2 thugs who came to break his ribs. But here, in this room, that didn't matter. Hale continued calmly. Additionally, Mr. Cole has exhibited disturbing behavior toward a minor. Grant straightened instantly. Objection, Grant said sharply. Hale raised his hand slightly. I'm referring to the young woman known as Emma. Ryan felt his stomach drop. Emma, the daughter he hadn't even known existed until a few weeks ago. Hale spoke again, voice heavy with suggestion. Mr. Cole has recently inserted himself into the life of a teenage girl he had no prior relationship with. We believe the nature of this contact raises serious questions. Grant stood immediately. Your Honor, that is an outrageous accusation. Judge Thompson looked mildly annoyed. Mr. Hale, tread carefully. Hale nodded politely. Of course, Your Honor. My point is simply that Mr. Cole has demonstrated a pattern of manipulation with vulnerable individuals. Ryan felt anger rising like fire in his chest. Manipulation? Celeste had lied for 14 years. She had used him, spied on him, destroyed his life, and now she sat there pretending to be the victim. Hale concluded smoothly. Given Mr. Cole's violent outbursts and questionable behavior, we believe granting him custody would place Jordan in a dangerous environment. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Thompson turned toward Grant. Your response? Grant stood slowly. He adjusted his jacket calmly. Then he said something simple. We would like to call a witness. Hale frowned slightly. Grant looked toward the courtroom doors. Emma Collins. The name echoed through the room. A moment later, the courtroom doors opened. A teenage girl stepped inside. Ryan recognized her immediately from the photographs Dennis had shown him. Dark hair, sharp eyes, a face that carried a strange, painful resemblance to Celeste. Emma walked toward the witness stand calmly, though Ryan could see the tension in her shoulders. Celeste froze. For the first time that day, her composure cracked. Her eyes widened slightly. Emma, she whispered under her breath. Emma sat down at the stand and took the oath. Grant approached gently. Emma, he said kindly, do you know Celeste Cole? Emma looked across the courtroom. Her eyes met Celeste's. Then she nodded. She's my biological mother. A murmur spread through the gallery. Grant continued. Have you had contact with her over the years? Emma nodded again. Yes. How often? Emma hesitated briefly. Whenever she needed me. Grant tilted his head slightly. What do you mean by that? Emma took a breath. Then she spoke calmly. Whenever she needed an excuse. The courtroom grew quieter. Grant didn't interrupt. Emma continued. She would tell people she was visiting me. She said she had a daughter in another city she had to check on. Emma looked at Celeste again. But most of the time she wasn't with me. Grant asked softly, where was she? Emma's voice didn't shake. With other men. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Celeste's attorney immediately stood. Objection, but the damage was already spreading through the room. Grant continued carefully. Emma, how long did this go on? Emma answered without hesitation. Years. Grant nodded slowly. And during those years, your mother used you as an alibi? Emma looked down briefly. Then she nodded. Yes. Across the courtroom, Celeste looked pale. Sebastian leaned toward her, whispering something urgently. Judge Thompson leaned forward slightly, his expression more focused now. Grant stepped back. No further questions. The courtroom doors suddenly burst open. Everyone turned. A small boy ran inside. Jordan. Ryan's heart nearly stopped. Jordan, someone shouted. But the boy kept running, straight toward the center of the courtroom. His face was red from crying. Tears streamed down his cheeks. He pointed toward Celeste. My mom told those men to scare Dad. Gasps exploded across the courtroom. Jordan continued, shouting through sobs. She said they just needed to make him afraid. The room descended into chaos. Lawyers shouting. People standing. The bailiff rushing forward. Ryan sat frozen, staring at his son. Celeste looked like the floor had vanished beneath her. Judge Thompson slammed his gavel. Order! The courtroom slowly quieted. But something had changed. The perfect story Celeste's lawyers had built was beginning to fracture. Judge Thompson leaned back in his chair. For the first time since the hearing began, he looked uncertain. The story was beginning to crack. Chapter 8, The Kidnapping Mistake. Sebastian Moretti was not used to losing. For most of his life, problems had been things you eliminated, obstacles you removed, people you outspent, outmaneuvered, or outlasted. But Ryan Cole had become something different. A complication. Sebastian sat in the back seat of his black sedan as it rolled slowly through downtown traffic. The city lights flickered across the tinted windows, casting brief flashes of gold across his sharp features. Across from him, his assistant Luca nervously reviewed messages on a tablet. The hearing didn't go the way we expected, Lucas said cautiously. Sebastian didn't answer right away. He stared out the window, watching pedestrians move along the sidewalk like pieces on a chessboard. That little courtroom stunt, Luca continued carefully. The daughter, the boy, the judge looked uncertain. Sebastian finally spoke. Uncertainty spreads, he said quietly. His voice remained calm, but there was something colder beneath it. A judge who doubts becomes a judge who asks questions. Luca nodded. And questions lead to problems. Sebastian leaned back in his seat. We're not going to let it reach that point. Luca hesitated. What do you want to do? Sebastian didn't even look at him. Remove the lawyer. Luca blinked. Grant Stevens? Yes. Luca swallowed slightly. He's stubborn, but threatening him directly might attract attention. Sebastian's lips curled faintly. That's why we won't threaten him. He turned his head slowly. We'll motivate him. Luca understood immediately. His family. Sebastian nodded once. Grant Stevens has a wife. Emily Stevens. Schoolteacher. Leaves work every afternoon around 4:30. Luca stared at the tablet. You want her taken? Temporarily, Sebastian said smoothly. Just enough pressure to make Grant reconsider his priorities. The car continued moving through the city. Sebastian's expression remained perfectly composed. Once he drops Ryan's case, he added, she'll be returned safely. Luca exhaled slowly. And if he refuses? Sebastian's eyes hardened slightly. Then he learns the cost of loyalty. 2 days later, the plan was set in motion. Emily Stevens left the small elementary school just after 4:30 in the afternoon. She carried a stack of student papers under her arm and walked toward the parking lot, humming softly to herself. It was a normal routine, one she had followed hundreds of times. 2 men sat inside a dark, then parked across the street. Watching. That's her, one of them said. The other adjusted a baseball cap. Simple grab. 30 seconds. The van door slid open. They stepped out. Emily had just reached her car when she noticed them approaching. At first she thought they were parents from a school. Then she saw their faces, and the way they moved. Fast. Purposeful. Excuse me. One of the men grabbed her arm. She gasped. Hey, what are you doing? The second man opened the van door. Get her inside. Emily struggled. Harder than they expected. She screamed. Help! The sound echoed across the parking lot. And then everything went wrong. A black SUV suddenly screeched around the corner. Another vehicle followed behind it. Doors burst open. Federal agents. Don't move. The 2 kidnappers froze. One tried to run. He didn't get far. Agents tackled him to the ground before he made it 5 steps. Emily collapsed against her car, shaking as an agent guided her away. You're safe, the agent told her. What's happening? She stammered. The agent looked toward the men now being cuffed on the pavement. We'd like to ask them the same question. 3 days later, Sebastian Moretti received a phone call he did not enjoy. Lucas stood across the office, pale. The men were arrested, he said quietly. Sebastian's eyes narrowed. Ow! They picked the wrong parking lot. Sebastian leaned forward slowly. Explain. Lucas swallowed. Apparently, the FBI had been conducting surveillance nearby, an unrelated investigation. Sebastian said nothing, but the silence in the room felt like pressure building inside a sealed chamber. Luca continued nervously. Once the agents realized it was an attempted kidnapping, they detained both men immediately. Sebastian rubbed his temples slowly. And what did they say? Luca hesitated. Enough. Sebastian's eyes sharpened. What does that mean? Luca placed several printed documents on a desk. The FBI started digging. Sebastian flipped through the papers. Financial transfers, corporate records, phone logs. They're reviewing everything, Lucas said. Financial transfers, corporate contracts, communication records. Sebastian's jaw tightened slightly. They're treating this as organized criminal activity. Sebastian stood slowly and walked to the window. The city skyline stretched beyond the glass. For the first time in years, the board was no longer fully under his control. Behind him, Luca continued speaking, and they found something else. Sebastian turned. What? Luca slid another folder forward. Emails. Sebastian opened it. His eyes scanned the documents quickly. Messages between Celeste and the corporate intelligence firm. Detailed exchanges. Reports. Information gathered from Ryan. Sebastian's face hardened. How much do they have? Enough to prove coordination, Lucas said quietly. Sebastian closed the folder slowly. And me? Luca hesitated again. They found records linking you to the firm. Sebastian didn't speak. The room felt very quiet. But Luca wasn't finished. There's more. Sebastian's voice dropped slightly. Say it. Luca pushed forward the final document. Judge Thompson. Sebastian's eyes narrowed. What about him? Bank transfers. Sebastian opened the page. His expression finally changed. Just slightly. Evidence that Judge Thompson had received bribes. Large ones. Over several years. Sebastian exhaled slowly. Well, he murmured. That complicates things. 2 weeks later, the news exploded across the city. Judge Thompson was arrested. Federal agents escorted him out of the courthouse in handcuffs, while cameras flashed wildly. The footage played across every news channel. Corruption, bribery, judicial misconduct. The investigation quickly widened. The custody case involving Ryan Cole was suddenly no longer a simple divorce battle. Federal prosecutors stepped in. The case was transferred immediately. Ryan sat in Grant Stevens' office when the news arrived. Grant hung up the phone slowly. Ryan watched him. What happened? Grant leaned back in his chair. Everything just changed. Ryan frowned. What do you mean? Grant slid a document across the desk. The federal government just took over the investigation. Ryan stared at him. Grant nodded once. Judge Thompson was arrested this morning. Ryan blinked. What? Grant folded his hands. The bribery evidence was confirmed. Ryan felt like the floor had tilted beneath him. So what happens now? Grant looked directly at him. Now. He allowed a small smile. Now this isn't just a custody battle anymore. Ryan waited. Grant spoke carefully. Your case just moved to federal court. Now the battlefield had completely changed. Chapter 9. Celeste finally confesses. Ryan sat alone on the worn leather bench in the small, dimly lit conference room at the federal courthouse. His hands were folded in his lap, knuckles white, as he stared at the blank wall across from him. Every tick of the clock echoed loudly in the silence, each second stretching longer than the last. He had agreed to this meeting on one condition. No lawyers, no games, just him and Celeste. When the door opened, he looked up immediately. Celeste stepped in quietly. She wore a plain blouse and jeans, nothing like the polished, confident woman who had stormed through his life years ago. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, her eyes red-rimmed, her movements slow, deliberate. For the first time in years, she didn't radiate control. She looked exhausted, broken. Ryan didn't stand. He didn't move. He simply watched her approach the chair across from him and sit. They sat in silence for several long moments, neither speaking, both measuring the other. Finally, Celeste spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to see you before all of this goes to court, she said. Ryan's jaw tightened. Why now? Celeste hesitated. She looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. Because I can't go to trial pretending anymore. You deserve the truth. Ryan leaned back slightly, arms crossed. I've been waiting 15 years for that, Celeste. Let's hear it. She swallowed hard and looked up, her gaze meeting his for the first time in years without anger or defiance. I was recruited 8 years ago. Ryan's eyes narrowed. Recruited for what? To target you, she admitted. I was sent to get close to you. Your job, your life, everything. Ryan felt his chest tighten. He had suspected, yes, but hearing her say it aloud sent a shiver down his spine. He didn't move, didn't speak, letting her continue. It started as business, Celeste whispered. I wasn't supposed to get attached. I wasn't supposed to care about you, or Jordan. I was supposed to watch, to report. Ryan's fists clenched in his lap, but he stayed silent. She took a deep breath. But years later, Sebastian discovered what was happening. He found out about the operation and forced me to continue. I had no choice. Ryan's head snapped up. No choice? So all the lies, the theft, the affairs, you weren't choosing any of that. Celeste shook her head slowly. At first, yes. But after a while, it became something else. I started to care. I started to love you, Ryan. I loved Jordan. I tried to separate it from the operation, but her voice cracked, trailing off. Ryan didn't move. His mind raced. Every betrayal, every stolen year, every moment she had walked away with their son flashed before his eyes. By the time I realized I truly loved you, she continued softly, tears brimming in her eyes, it was too late. I was trapped. Sebastian had leverage. Everything I did, every lie I told, I couldn't undo it. Ryan exhaled slowly. His chest felt tight, heavy, almost impossible to lift. The room felt smaller, suffocating, as he studied the woman across from him, the woman who had built an entire world of deception around him. Then he asked the one question that had haunted him every day since the Cadillac blocked his gate. His voice was quiet but deliberate. Was any of it real? Celeste looked down again, shaking her head. Her lips trembled. I don't know. I wanted it to be. I wanted to love you. I wanted to be your wife, Jordan's mother. But the truth is, it started as a lie. Everything else, I don't know what to call it. Ryan said nothing. He didn't want to respond. His mind was still spinning, trying to reconcile the image of the woman he had loved with the spy who had infiltrated his life. Finally, Celeste lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes once more. I want to make this right. I want to testify against Sebastian. I'll tell the courts everything. Ryan studied her silently. The anger was still there, deep and raw, but beneath it was something else, recognition. Recognition that she had chosen, at last, to step away from the lies. Testify, he said slowly, and tell the truth. No more games. Celeste nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek. I will. Everything. No more lies. Ryan leaned back in his chair. For the first time in weeks, he felt a small flicker of control return to his chest. The battlefield was about to shift again, but at least now he knew what he was facing. At least now he had the truth. They sat in silence after that, the weight of years pressing between them, neither knowing what to say next. Ryan didn't need her excuses, her explanations, or her apologies. He only needed one thing to be clear. She was finally willing to help bring the real enemy to justice. And for the first time since the black Cadillac had blocked his gate, he felt the faintest edge of hope. Celeste finally agreed to testify against Sebastian. Chapter 10, The Final Judgment. The federal courthouse was packed. Reporters, spectators, lawyers, and agents filled the seats, a low murmur of anticipation buzzing through the air like static. The tension was thick, almost tangible, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Ryan Mitchell sat at the plaintiff's table, hands folded, eyes fixed on the front of the courtroom. Beside him, Grant Stevens leaned back slightly, reviewing the final documents one last time. His calm presence offered Ryan some measure of reassurance, though it did little to still the tight knot of anxiety in his chest. Across the aisle, Sebastian Moretti lounged in his seat, flanked by a cadre of highly paid attorneys who exuded confidence, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. He had been brought down to this moment by the very empire he had built. Celeste sat quietly in a corner, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Gone was the polished facade of control. Gone was the indifference. She looked small, humbled, and yet determined. Ryan's gaze briefly met hers. There was no warmth, only recognition. Recognition that for all the deception, she had finally chosen the truth. The judge entered, a stern woman with sharp eyes and the kind of presence that made everyone in the room straighten instinctively. She took her seat and addressed the court. "Let us proceed," she said, her voice calm but authoritative. "We will hear closing statements and testimony before rendering judgment." Sebastian's lead attorney, Victor Hale, stood first. He approached the bench, his polished shoes clicking against the courtroom floor. He turned slightly toward the jury and began speaking in a practiced, persuasive tone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hale began smoothly, "my client, Mr. Moretti, has been accused of orchestrating a series of unfortunate events surrounding Mr. Ryan Mitchell. But let us not forget, Mr. Mitchell himself is far from perfect. 10 years ago, he committed an act of infidelity, a betrayal of trust, a lapse in judgment." Ryan's jaw tightened. He had anticipated this. He did not flinch. He did not try to hide the truth. Grant leaned forward slightly and whispered, "Own it, Ryan. Simple truth beats spinning lies." Ryan nodded subtly. "Yes," he said aloud when Hale had finished his statement. "I cheated. Once. 10 years ago. A mistake. A single betrayal. I'm not proud of it. But I will not allow it to define the man I have been for the last decade. And I will not allow it to compare to years of calculated deception, manipulation, theft, and espionage perpetrated against me and my family." The courtroom fell silent. The judge tilted her head, scrutinizing Ryan closely, then scribbled a few notes on her pad. It was time. Grant stood and motioned toward Celeste. "She will testify now," he said firmly. Celeste rose slowly, her legs unsteady as she approached the witness stand. Each step seemed weighted with the years of lies she had carried. She took the oath, her hand trembling slightly as she swore to tell the truth. The courtroom waited. Celeste's voice was quiet at first, then stronger, steadier. I married Ryan Mitchell as part of a corporate intelligence operation," she began. "I was recruited to gather information from him. At first, it was only business. I did what I was told. I followed instructions. But eventually, I fell in love. I loved him. I loved our son, Jordan. But it was too late. By then, I was trapped. Sebastian Moretti discovered the operation and forced me to continue spying." Her hands clenched at her sides. Tears threatened her composure, but she pushed forward. "I betrayed him. I betrayed our family. I deceived him in ways that I cannot even fully express. I am guilty of conspiracy and corporate espionage. I accept responsibility for my actions. I am sorry." Ryan listened silently. His hands rested lightly on the table, fingers tapping once in a quiet rhythm. The words he had longed to hear, the truth he had needed, filled the room like a verdict waiting to be delivered. The prosecution detailed Sebastian's crimes, his manipulation, the bribery of Judge Thompson, the corporate espionage, the threats, and attempted kidnappings. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, emails, phone logs, witness statements. Each fact laid bare the calculated ruthlessness Sebastian had used to try and destroy Ryan's life. Sebastian's face remained calm, but every so often, a flicker of unease crossed his eyes. The walls he had built around himself, the confidence, the arrogance, the belief in his untouchable power, were cracking. Finally, the judge cleared her throat, lifting the papers before her. She looked directly at Ryan. After reviewing the extensive evidence, testimonies, and the admissions of all parties involved, she said, her voice carrying weight and finality, "The court finds as follows." She paused briefly, letting the moment sink in. Ryan Mitchell is awarded full custody of his son, Jordan Mitchell. Ryan's chest tightened with relief. His shoulders sagged slightly, but he remained composed. He glanced at Jordan, knowing that the boy's life would finally have stability and truth at its center. Sebastian Moretti is sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for conspiracy, corporate espionage, bribery, and multiple counts of intimidation and threats. The courtroom buzzed. Reporters scribbled, cameras flashed. Sebastian's face remained impassive. Though his jaw was tight, his fingers curled into fists. Celeste Mitchell is sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for conspiracy, espionage, and her role in the manipulation and betrayal of her family. Ryan's gaze briefly met hers. She lowered her head, a flicker of shame crossing her features. The gavel hit the desk with a solid, definitive bang. The trial was over. Grant placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder. "It's done," he said quietly. Ryan nodded, feeling the weight of the past months begin to lift. "It's finally done." Outside the courtroom, Ryan took a deep breath of fresh air. For the first time in months, the world felt steady beneath his feet. He had his son. He had the truth. And he had the knowledge that justice, however long delayed, had been served. In the weeks that followed, Ryan rebuilt his life carefully. Slowly, with intention. Emma, Celeste's daughter, eventually reached out. Ryan met her cautiously at first, but over time, she became part of their lives. She and Jordan grew close, finding laughter and understanding in each other. Together, they built a new family. One not built on deception, lies, or manipulation, but on truth, loyalty, and honesty. Ryan finally understood what he had always suspected deep in his heart. The family he had lost, the one he thought he knew, had been built on lies. But the one he gained, this one was real. He held Jordan's hand as they walked home, sunlight warming their faces, and for the first time in years, Ryan felt the fragile, quiet strength of hope. A family forged not by circumstances, but by truth. A life reclaimed. A future rebuilt. The story of betrayal, deceit, and manipulation had ended, and Ryan Mitchell finally could breathe